My sick partner secretly cut me out of his healthy life plans after I financially supported him for 4 years. I disappeared from his life entirely. Me and Adrian had been together for 10 years and honestly thought we were endgame. We met at his cousin's wedding when we both hid outside during the chicken dance. 4 years ago, he got diagnosed with this rare kidney condition that basically wrecked his whole system. I switched to remote work, moved us to a ground floor place closer to the hospital, learned to cook all his safe foods, memorized every medication interaction, and drove him to dialysis 3 times a week. I never complained because that's what you do when you love someone. His good days made all the bad ones worth it. We'd play board games during his treatments, and I'd read him stupid Reddit posts when he felt too sick to look at screens. Even his nurses would joke that I should get a medical degree with everything I knew about his condition. Then 3 months ago, his brother Felix tested as a match for donation, and this specialist in Denver had a new treatment program that could basically give Adrian his life back. We sat in our kitchen crying happy tears and planning everything. The program required Adrian to stay in Denver for 2 months for the procedure and recovery monitoring. Felix would come for the donation surgery and stay a week or two. We found a 2-bedroom place online that allowed medical equipment and was close to the treatment center. Adrian wanted to split costs 3 ways between us and Felix, which seemed fair. I started working overtime to save up and got approval to work remotely from Denver. We even talked about exploring the city during his recovery, making it into something positive instead of just medical stuff. I was genuinely excited because after 4 years of hospitals and medications, we'd finally get our future back. Last week, I was checking our emergency account to see if we had enough for the deposit when I noticed this huge withdrawal from October. Like $3,000 just gone. Adrian handles most of our medical expenses from that account, so I figured it was treatment-related. But when I went to file it for insurance reimbursement, I found this rental agreement in our shared email drafts. It was for a 1-bedroom apartment in Denver, maximum occupancy 2 people, signed by Adrian and Felix. Just them. No mention of me anywhere. The lease started January 1st, exactly when the treatment program began. I sat there staring at the screen thinking I was reading it wrong. We'd literally discussed paint colors for our temporary place 2 days before. I'd bought winter clothes for Denver weather. My boss had already approved my remote work request. When Adrian came home from his appointment that afternoon, I casually mentioned how excited I was to spend the winter in Denver together. He got this weird look and started talking about how I could visit on weekends. Visit. Like I was some distant relative instead of the person who'd been cleaning his dialysis port and sleeping in hospital chairs for 4 years. I asked what he meant by visit, and he said the treatment would be really intensive and he needed to focus. I said that's why I was coming, to help him focus on getting better. He said Felix would be there to help. I asked for how long, and he said the whole 2 months actually. Felix got extended leave from work. That's when I knew this wasn't some misunderstanding. They'd planned this together. Cut me out completely. I wanted to scream, but his heart monitor was already beeping faster, so I just said we'd figure it out later. That night, I messaged Felix's girlfriend, Diana, asking if she was excited about Denver. She had no idea what I was talking about. Felix hadn't mentioned any extended leave or Denver plans to her. She said he'd only asked for 4 days off for the donation surgery. When she asked him about it, he was confused and said Adrian had been handling all the arrangements. So either Felix was playing dumb or Adrian lied to both of us. At that point, I didn't care which one was true. The next morning, while Adrian was at dialysis, I opened my own bank account and started moving my paychecks there. I found a studio apartment on the other side of town and put down a deposit. I packed 1 box at a time while he was at treatments and stored them at my friend Hazel's place. I smiled through dinner conversations about Denver restaurants we should try. I helped him pick out recovery clothes for the cold weather. I even drove him to his pre-treatment appointments and took notes like always. 2 weeks before they were supposed to leave, I told Adrian I had a work conference that week and would be gone for 4 days. He barely looked up from his phone and said that was fine. Felix could drive him to his final appointments. I moved everything out while he was at dialysis. I sit on the air mattress Hazel helped me carry up 3 flights of stairs this morning, staring at my phone like it might explode. The screen stays dark and quiet. Adrian's at dialysis right now with Felix driving him, probably complaining about his port or the chair temperature or whatever small thing bothered him today. He has no idea that every single thing I own is gone from our apartment. My clothes, my books, my laptop charger, the coffee mug I bought myself last year because Adrian said the one I wanted was too expensive. All of it packed into boxes at Hazel's place or here in this empty studio that smells like fresh paint and someone else's cleaning products. The silence feels wrong. For 4 years, my life ran on medical alarms, pill schedules, appointment reminders buzzing every few hours. Now there's nothing. Just me and this air mattress and the sound of traffic outside. I check the time. He'll be done with treatment in 2 hours. Then Felix will drive him home and he'll walk into our apartment and see the empty spaces where my stuff used to be. My stomach twists, but I don't feel guilty exactly. More like I'm watching myself from outside my body, waiting to see what happens next. The Chinese takeout menu on the counter catches my eye, and I grab my phone to order something, then stop because I don't have to check if the restaurant uses kidney-safe ingredients. I can order whatever I want. The thought makes me put the phone down and just sit there for a minute, trying to remember what I even like to eat. My phone lights up at exactly 6:14, the first call. I watch Adrian's name flash across the screen and let it go to voicemail. Then another call. Another. The notifications start piling up so fast I can barely read them. 15 calls in 20 minutes. The texts come in between the calls, each one a variation of the same panic. Where are you? Call me back. What happened? Where's all your stuff? Are you okay? I'm scared. Please answer. I scroll through them with my thumb, reading each one like I'm checking items off a grocery list. 30 texts now. He's called from 3 different numbers, probably thinking I blocked him. I haven't blocked anything yet. I just wanted to watch it happen, see how long it took him to notice I was gone for real. The surprise is that I feel absolutely nothing. I thought I'd feel guilty or sad or at least something, but it's like watching a stranger's phone blow up. My hands stay steady. My breathing stays normal. I set the phone face down on the air mattress and it keeps buzzing against the thin fabric like an angry insect. Another call. Another text. I pick up the phone and open my messages, typing out one simple sentence. I found the Denver lease. The 1-bedroom for you and Felix. I'm not visiting on weekends like some distant relative. I'm done. I hit send and immediately power off the phone completely. The silence that follows feels huge and clean. I order Thai food from a place that definitely isn't kidney safe, extra spicy because I can, and eat it sitting cross-legged on my air mattress in blessed quiet. I turn my phone back on the next morning and it takes 3 full minutes for all the notifications to load. Messages from Adrian, more messages from Adrian, then messages from Felix too. I open Felix's first because I'm curious what story Adrian told him. The texts claim he's confused and asking what's going on. He wants to know if Adrian and I had a fight. He says Adrian is really upset and won't tell him what happened. I read through them twice, trying to figure out if Felix is genuinely in the dark about being used as an excuse to push me out, or if he's playing dumb because Diana confronted him. Either way, I don't have the energy to figure it out yet. Adrian's messages have shifted from panic to anger to pleading. He needs to talk to me. I'm being unreasonable. He can explain everything. His health is suffering from the stress. That last one almost makes me laugh. His health is suffering because he stopped going to dialysis on time, so he could hunt for my new address. I delete everything without responding and take a shower in my new bathroom that has decent water pressure for the first time in 4 years, because our old place had terrible plumbing. Adrian never wanted to complain about to the landlord. Hadley notices immediately when I log into our morning video call. I've worked remotely for 2 years, but she can tell I'm in a completely different space. The wall behind me is blank white instead of the bookshelf she's used to seeing. My face probably looks different too. I didn't sleep much, but I also didn't spend the night monitoring someone's oxygen levels or getting up to check medication times. She asks if I moved and I say yes, sort of. She gets this look like she knows something big happened but doesn't want to push. Instead, she just says if I need to talk, she's free for coffee after work. The offer sits there between us on the screen and I feel something crack open in my chest. She's the first person besides Hazel who's noticed something's wrong and cared enough to ask without making it about them. I tell her yes, coffee sounds good, and we move on to talking about the project deadline. Work feels normal and solid and mine in a way nothing else does right now. Adrian shows up at my office building at 3:30 that afternoon. I'm in the middle of reviewing code when my phone rings from the front desk security. They say there's someone named Adrian in the lobby asking for me and do I want them to send him up. My hands start shaking before my brain catches up. He somehow figured out where I work even though I never told him the exact address. He must have gone through my emails or asked someone or I don't know what. I tell security I don't want to see him and to please ask him to leave. The security guard says okay and hangs up. I sit there staring at my computer screen with my hands trembling against the keyboard. The guilt I expected to feel yesterday isn't there. Instead, I'm angry. Angry that he came here. Angry that he thought he could show up at my workplace after what he did. Angry that he's making this about him needing to explain instead of about the fact that he cut me out of his recovery plans while taking my money. I close my laptop and pack up early because I can't focus anymore. Hadley messages asking if I'm okay, and I tell her I'll explain at coffee. The coffee shop is halfway between my office and my new apartment. Hadley's already there when I arrive, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. She got me my usual order without asking. I sit down and the whole story just pours out. 4 years of caregiving condensed into 30 minutes. Learning to cook kidney-safe meals. driving to dialysis 3 times a week, sleeping in the hospital chairs, working overtime to save for Denver, finding the lease agreement, the $3,000 gone from our emergency account. Adrian telling me I could visit on weekends like I was some distant relative instead of the person who kept him alive. Hadley listens without interrupting, her face getting more angry as I talk. When I finish, she says that's messed up, like genuinely messed up, and her anger on my behalf feels good. She's the first person besides Hazel who knows the full truth, and she's looking at me like I did the right thing by leaving, like I'm not crazy for feeling betrayed. She asks if I'm okay, and I realize I actually am. Scared and angry and confused, but also okay. We sit there drinking coffee, and she tells me about her sister's messy divorce last year, how sometimes you don't see how bad something is until you're out of it. The comparison makes sense in a way I don't want to think about too hard. My phone rings that evening from a number I don't recognize. I almost don't answer, but something makes me pick up. Adrian's voice comes through weak and scared, using the exact tone that always made me drop everything to help him. He says he can explain everything. I misunderstood the lease situation. He needs me. The familiar words trigger something automatic in my brain, that old caregiver instinct that says, fix this, help him, make it okay. Then I remember sitting at my computer staring at a 1-bedroom lease signed by him and Felix with no mention of me anywhere. I hang up after 10 seconds and immediately block the number. My hands are shaking again, but this time it's from anger, not guilt. He really thought he could use his sick voice and I'd come running back like nothing happened. Diana messages me around 8 asking if we can talk. She says Felix finally admitted there's some confusion about the Denver plans. Her text sounds frustrated and suspicious in a way that gives me hope. Maybe she'll be honest about what Felix actually knew. I message back suggesting lunch tomorrow at a place halfway between our apartments. She agrees immediately. I spend the rest of the evening unpacking one box, just my winter clothes that I bought specifically for Denver. I hang them in my new closet and wonder if I'll ever actually wear them, or if they'll just remind me of plans that never happened. I spend my second night in the studio actually setting things up instead of just existing in the space. I hang my clothes in the closet, organizing them by type instead of by what's easiest to grab when rushing to an appointment. I arrange my books on the floor against the wall since I don't have a bookshelf yet, alphabetizing them because I can take the time now. I put up photos on the walls using sticky strips, choosing the ones that are just me and my friends with no Adrian in them. There's one from 3 years ago at Hazel's birthday party where I'm laughing at something, my face relaxed and happy in a way I haven't looked in recent photos. I stick it on the wall across from my air mattress so it's the first thing I see when I wake up. Each small action feels like I'm taking back pieces of myself I forgot existed. The person who liked reading and had opinions about book plots. The person who had friends and went to parties. The person who existed before becoming someone's full-time medical support. I find my old journal at the bottom of a box, the one I stopped writing in 2 years ago because I was too tired at night. I open it to a random page and read an entry about wanting to learn photography. I'd completely forgotten about that. I add it to a list on my phone of things I want to do now that my time is actually mine. I meet Diana at this sandwich place halfway between our apartments the next day. She's already at a table when I walk in, and I can tell from her face she's been thinking about this all night. We order food, and she pulls out her phone before we even sit down with our trays. She shows me text messages between her and Felix from the past 2 months, scrolling through them while I read over her shoulder. Every single message about Denver treats it like Felix is going for a quick medical procedure and coming right back. He talks about taking 4 days off work, mentions being nervous about the surgery, asks her to record some TV show he'll miss. There's absolutely nothing about extended leave or staying 2 months or helping Adrian recover. I feel my stomach drop because this means Adrian lied to me about Felix's involvement, which somehow feels worse than if they'd planned it together. Diana scrolls further back and shows me a message from 3 weeks ago where Felix asks Adrian about the Denver apartment details. Adrian's response just says he's handling everything and Felix shouldn't worry about it. Felix never saw the lease. He had no idea it was a 1-bedroom. Diana puts her phone down and her hands are shaking slightly. She admits she's been noticing weird things about how Adrian talks about me for the past year. Little comments at family dinners about how I'm too involved in his medical care, how he wishes he had more independence, how the illness makes him feel like less of a man when I have to help him with basic stuff. She thought it was just normal sick person frustration, the kind of thing everyone feels when they're dependent on someone else. But now she's wondering if he was building this narrative the whole time, creating a story where I was overbearing instead of helpful, so he could justify pushing me out when he finally got better. I sit there eating my sandwich and processing that Adrian spent months crafting a version of our relationship where I was the problem. Diana keeps apologizing for not saying something sooner, but I tell her it's not her fault because how could she know? We finish lunch and she hugs me in the parking lot, Says she's going to have a serious talk with Felix about not blindly trusting his brother. That evening, I log into our shared bank accounts to start documenting everything for when I fully separate our finances. I'm scrolling through transactions when I notice another transfer I missed before. $2,000 moved from our emergency account to Adrian's personal account 3 days before I left. I sit there staring at the screen doing math in my head. $3,000 in October plus $2,000 last month equals $5,000 total. He's moved without telling me. Money I contributed to from working overtime specifically for Denver expenses. Money that was supposed to cover our shared costs for the treatment program. I check the dates again and realize he made that second transfer right after I told him about my fake work conference. Like he knew I was leaving and wanted to grab whatever he could first. The financial betrayal hits different from the emotional one because it's so calculated and practical. This wasn't about feelings or independence or medical stress. This was about money and planning and making sure he had resources while cutting me out of his future. I screenshot every transaction and save them to a folder on my laptop. Then I start the process of removing my name from the shared accounts, which apparently takes 3 business days and requires both signatures unless I can prove fraud. I fill out the forms claiming unauthorized transfers and submit them to the bank's fraud department. My hands aren't shaking anymore. I just feel cold and methodical about protecting what's mine. The next afternoon, there's a knock on my apartment door. I look through the peephole and see my landlord Tyson standing there with a toolbox. I open the door and he asks if everything's working okay in the apartment. Says he's doing his monthly check of the units. I let him in and he looks around at my air mattress and the boxes I still haven't fully unpacked, and the minimal furniture situation. He checks the outlets and the water pressure and the heating vents, making notes on a clipboard. Then he mentions his sister went through a bad breakup last year and lived on an air mattress for 2 months. Says it gets better, but takes time. His casual kindness from a complete stranger hits me harder than I expect. I feel tears starting and try to hide my face by pretending to look for something in a box. Tyson doesn't comment on it, just finishes his inspection and tells me to call if I need anything fixed. After he leaves, I sit on my air mattress and cry for the first time since I left Adrian. Not because I miss him, but because a stranger with a toolbox showed me more consideration in 5 minutes than my partner of 10 years did in his entire Denver planning process. My phone rings while I'm still wiping my face. I don't recognize the number, but I answer anyway. Adrian's mother. Jacqueline's voice comes through crying and upset. I forgot to block her number when I blocked Adrian's. She's begging me to reconsider leaving, saying Adrian's health is suffering from the stress and he needs me to help him through the Denver treatment. She goes on about how much he loves me and how the illness has been so hard on him and how I'm abandoning him when he needs me most. The audacity of asking me to continue caregiving after he literally planned his recovery without me makes me laugh out loud. Like actually laugh, not a bitter sound but genuine surprised laughter at the absurdity. Jacqueline stops crying mid-sentence, shocked into silence. I can hear her breathing on the other end of the line, trying to figure out what's funny. I tell her exactly what I found. The lease for a 1-bedroom apartment in Denver with maximum occupancy 2 people, signed by Adrian and Felix with no mention of me. The $3,000 he transferred in October. The additional $2,000 he moved 3 days before I left. The lies he told both me and Felix about the living arrangements. Jacqueline tries to defend him, saying the illness has been hard on him, and he's not thinking clearly. I point out that he was thinking clearly enough to research Denver apartments and compare prices and sign legal documents and systematically move money around without telling me. If he's well enough to plan an entire 2-month relocation and exclude me from it, he's well enough to handle the consequences of that choice. Then I hang up and immediately block her number. My phone feels lighter in my hand. Work becomes my refuge because it's the one part of my life that was always mine and not about Adrian's illness. I log in early and stay late, taking on extra projects that have been sitting in the backlog for months. I volunteer for the complicated tasks nobody else wants, the ones that require deep focus and problem solving. Rebuilding my identity as someone competent and valuable beyond caregiving skills feels important right now. Hadley notices my intensity during our afternoon video call and asks if I'm doing okay. I tell her I'm actually doing better than okay. I'm remembering what it feels like to be good at something that has nothing to do with medical schedules. She makes me promise I'm actually eating lunch instead of working through it. I promise and mean it because taking care of myself is part of this whole reclaiming my life thing. Felix calls me directly for the first time 2 days later. His voice sounds genuinely confused and upset, not the defensive tone I expected. He explains that Adrian told him I was planning to stay behind for work reasons and visit occasionally, that it was my choice to not come to Denver full-time. Felix thought he was respecting my decision to prioritize my career, not participating in excluding me from Adrian's recovery. The manipulation is so clean and complete that Felix believed he was respecting my wishes, rather than being used as an excuse to push me out. I feel anger rising, but not at Felix. at Adrian for lying so smoothly to everyone involved. I send Felix screenshots of our text conversations from the past 2 months. Messages where Adrian and I discussed paint colors for our Denver place. My excitement about exploring the city during his recovery. My boss approving my remote work specifically for the Denver trip. Our discussions about winter clothes and local restaurants and making the treatment program into something positive instead of just medical. Felix goes quiet for a long time after I send them. I can hear him breathing and maybe crying a little. Finally, he admits Adrian has been lying to everyone about different things, and he doesn't know what's true anymore. He sounds tired and guilty, like he's realizing his brother used him as a prop in this whole scheme. I tell him I don't blame him for believing Adrian because why wouldn't you trust your sick brother? But I also tell him I can't be involved in any of this anymore, that he needs to figure out his relationship with Adrian separate from me. My phone rings again the next morning from a number I actually recognize. The dialysis nurse who knew me from 4 years of 3 weekly appointments. Adrian apparently gave her my old number and she tracked me down. She says Adrian's been missing treatments and showing up alone looking terrible when he does come and she's worried about him. I feel that old caregiver instinct kick in automatically, that immediate need to fix the problem and make sure he's okay. Then I consciously shut it down like closing a door in my mind. I explained to her that I'm no longer involved in Adrian's medical care, that he made choices that excluded me from his life, and I'm respecting those choices. She tries to push back saying he needs consistent support for his condition. I tell her he chose to eliminate his support system, and that's not my responsibility to fix. She gets quiet, and then apologizes for calling, says she didn't realize the situation. After we hang up, I sit with the guilt for a few minutes, then remind myself that Adrian is an adult who made deliberate choices, and I'm allowed to prioritize my own well-being. Nicholas reached out 3 days later through Instagram with a message that started friendly, but got serious fast. He mentioned hearing different versions of what happened between me and Adrian, said some family members were confused about why I left right before the Denver treatment. His message was careful, not accusatory, just asking if I wanted to share my perspective because the stories weren't adding up. I sat with my phone for 20 minutes deciding whether to respond at all. Opening up to Adrian's family felt risky because they'd known him his whole life, and me for only 10 years. But Nicholas had always been kind at family gatherings, never treated me like an outsider, so I started typing. I sent him screenshots first without explanation, the lease agreement showing maximum occupancy 2 people with Adrian, and Felix's signatures, the bank statement showing the $3,000 withdrawal, my text messages with Adrian about paint colors and Denver restaurants from the same week he signed that lease. Then I wrote out the timeline, how I worked overtime for months to save for our Denver trip, got my boss to approve remote work, bought winter clothes, researched the treatment center, planned everything around supporting his recovery. I explained the 4 years before that, the dialysis 3 times weekly, the medication schedules, the hospital chairs, learning to cook his safe foods, moving to a ground floor apartment near the hospital, switching my entire life to revolve around his illness. I told him about finding the lease and Adrian's casual suggestion that I could visit on weekends like some distant relative instead of the person who'd been his primary caregiver. I sent it all in one long message and then put my phone face down because reading his response felt too scary. Nicholas replied within an hour saying he believed me completely and felt sick reading the details. He said several family members suspected Adrian took me for granted, but nobody realized the extent of it, that erasing 4 years of caregiving from his recovery plans was cruel in a way that had nothing to do with being sick. He mentioned his own wife had been his caregiver during a bad accident recovery, and he couldn't imagine planning a future that excluded her, that illness didn't excuse exploitation. His validation made something tight in my chest loosen, because having someone from Adrian's family acknowledge the truth meant I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. The next afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping to find a letter taped to my apartment door. I recognized Adrian's handwriting immediately, the same slanted print he used on medication charts and appointment reminders. The envelope was from a medical supply company, one of those padded mailers they send catheters in, repurposed with my name written across the front. I stood in the hallway holding my grocery bags and staring at it for a solid minute. My hands started shaking a little, which made me angry because he shouldn't still have that effect on me. I unlocked my door, put the groceries away, made coffee, sat on my borrowed couch, and held that letter for 10 more minutes. Part of me wanted to read it desperately, wanted to know what explanation he thought could possibly justify everything. The other part knew that nothing he wrote would change what he did, that opening it would just give him access to my thoughts again. I carried it to the kitchen trash can and dropped it in unopened, then immediately took the trash bag outside to the dumpster so I couldn't fish it out later in a moment of weakness. Walking back to my apartment felt like winning something small but important. My first therapy appointment with Kira happened 2 days later in her office that smelled like lavender, and had those generic inspirational posters about growth. She asked me to start from the beginning, so I explained the kidney diagnosis, the 4 years of caregiving, the Denver betrayal, my secret move out. She listened without interrupting and then asked what my life looked like before Adrian got sick. I had to think hard because that version of me felt so distant. I used to go to happy hours with coworkers, took weekend trips with friends, applied for promotions that required office presence, had hobbies besides medical appointment scheduling. Kira pointed out that caregiving became my entire identity over 4 years, that I stopped seeing friends regularly, declined job opportunities, organized every single aspect of my life around dialysis schedules and medication times. She said I became invisible to myself while making Adrian's needs extremely visible, and he got so comfortable with that setup, he couldn't imagine me as a separate person with my own needs anymore. The observation hit hard because it was true. I'd stopped being a whole person and became a function, a support system, a medical assistant who also happened to live in the same apartment. Adrian's Denver plans made perfect sense from his perspective because he'd forgotten I existed as anything other than his caregiver. Kira said reclaiming my identity would take time and conscious effort, that I needed to practice stating my own needs and pursuing my own goals even when it felt selfish after years of putting him first. That evening, I checked our shared credit card statement out of habit and found a charge from an airline for $870. The purchase date was 2 days ago. The destination was Denver. The departure date was next week. Adrian apparently bought a plane ticket and was going ahead with the treatment despite missing dialysis appointments, despite Felix now being uncertain about donating, despite the treatment center's requirements for primary caregiver support. I sat there staring at my laptop screen trying to understand his thinking. The Denver program was his best shot at the innovative treatment, but he'd systematically destroyed his support system and was still charging forward like none of that mattered. The realization settled over me that he was prioritizing this Denver plan over his immediate health needs, that he was so desperate to escape our life together, he'd risk his medical stability. Part of me felt worried about him going to Denver alone without proper support. The bigger part recognized that wasn't my problem anymore, that he'd made choices that led directly to this situation, and I didn't have to rescue him from the consequences. Hadley messaged me Friday afternoon asking if I wanted to come to her sister's birthday party that weekend. My first instinct was to decline automatically, that familiar reflex from 4 years of needing to rush home for evening medications and being available for medical emergencies. Then I remembered I didn't have to do that anymore, that my evenings were actually mine now. I told her yes and felt weird about how simple that was. The party was at her sister's house with maybe 20 people, normal, friendly chaos with music and food and conversations about regular life things. I talked to Hadley's cousin about books we'd both read, her brother-in-law about hiking trails he recommended, her sister's friend about career goals and job searching. Nobody asked about medical conditions or caregiving or hospital logistics. We discussed travel plans and new restaurants and local politics and weekend projects. Topics that completely disappeared from my life when it became only about illness management. I stayed until almost midnight talking and laughing and feeling like an actual person again, instead of a medical assistant who happened to have a name. Driving home, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd had conversations about my own interests. The last time someone asked about my goals instead of Adrian's symptoms. Diana's message came through Sunday morning while I was having coffee. She said her and Felix had a huge fight about his willingness to go along with Adrian's lies without questioning anything. Felix apparently thought he was being a supportive brother by not challenging Adrian's version of events, by accepting whatever Adrian told him about the Denver arrangements. Diana pointed out that he enabled Adrian to financially and emotionally exploit me, that being a supportive brother didn't mean participating in someone else's betrayal. She said Felix was genuinely remorseful now that he understood the full picture, but also defensive about his choices, insisting he was just trying to help his sick brother. Their relationship was strained because Diana couldn't get past his willingness to accept Adrian's lies at face value without ever checking with me directly. She apologized for Felix's role in everything, even though she wasn't responsible for his choices. I told her I didn't blame Felix as much as Adrian because Adrian was the one who created and maintained the lies, but I appreciated her holding him accountable. She said they were taking a break to figure out if they could move forward, that this situation revealed problems in how Felix handled difficult family dynamics. An email arrived Monday afternoon from the Denver Treatment Center with the subject line, Family Support Program Registration Confirmation. I opened it confused because I never registered for anything. The email confirmed my enrollment in their Caregiver Resources Program, asked about my arrival date and housing arrangements, included information packets about supporting kidney transplant patients during recovery. At the bottom, it listed Adrian as the patient and me as the primary support person, the emergency contact, the designated caregiver for the 2-month program duration. I scrolled through attached PDFs about caregiver responsibilities, support group schedules, respite care options, educational sessions about post-transplant medication management. Adrian had registered me for their entire family support system, while simultaneously signing a lease that had no room for me, while planning his recovery without including me, while telling me I could visit on weekends. The paperwork showed he listed me as his primary support person in official medical documents at the exact same time he was excluding me from actually being there. The contradiction was so complete it almost felt intentional, like he wanted credit for having a dedicated caregiver, without actually including that caregiver in his life. I called the treatment center Tuesday morning and asked for the family support program coordinator. A woman named Sandra answered, sounding friendly and efficient. I explained I was listed as primary support for a patient, but I was no longer involved in his care, and they needed to update their records. Sandra's tone shifted to concerned, asking if everything was okay with our relationship and whether the patient had alternative support lined up. I said he'd made arrangements that excluded me, and I was respecting those arrangements by removing myself from his medical care. She mentioned that family support was a significant component of their program's success rate, that patients with dedicated caregivers had better outcomes and fewer complications. The guilt hit automatically, that old instinct to fix problems and make sure Adrian was okay. Then I consciously shut it down and reminded myself that Adrian chose to eliminate his primary support system when he signed that one-bedroom lease, that he prioritized his Denver plan over maintaining the relationship with his actual caregiver. I told Sandra to remove me from all program materials and update the patient's file to reflect he'd be attending without primary family support. She said she'd make the changes and wished me well, her voice sad like she was watching something preventable go wrong. Tyson knocked on my door Wednesday evening carrying a bed frame. He said his sister was moving and getting rid of furniture, asked if I needed anything since I was still sleeping on an air mattress. I followed him downstairs where his truck was loaded with a real bed frame, a small couch that had seen better days but was structurally sound, some kitchen items including actual dishes and a coffee maker. He said his sister wanted to pay forward the kindness people showed her during her difficult time last year. I helped him carry everything up 3 flights of stairs, both of us sweating and laughing by the end. The bed frame took 20 minutes to assemble with instructions that made no sense until we figured out we'd been holding the diagram upside down. Setting up the couch and arranging the kitchen items made my studio apartment start feeling like an actual home instead of a temporary hiding place. Tyson mentioned a game night at his place next week if I wanted to meet some neighbors, said it was usually just cards and snacks but good people. I told him I'd come and meant it. After he left, I sat on my new couch in my increasingly furnished apartment and felt something shift. This wasn't just where I was staying until I figured things out. This was becoming my actual life, my actual home, built piece by piece into something that belonged to me. I got a message from Nicholas the next morning while I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen. He said he'd been talking to other family members about what really happened, and several of them were refusing to help Adrian with Denver expenses anymore. His parents were still paying for things because they were his parents, and couldn't seem to stop themselves, but aunts and uncles who'd been planning to chip in had backed out completely. Nicholas said his mom felt betrayed on my behalf after learning I'd been working overtime to save money while Adrian was secretly planning to exclude me. The family was splitting into sides, and Adrian had created that fracture himself by lying to everyone about different things. I felt a weird mix of validation and guilt reading those messages, like I was glad people saw the truth but also uncomfortable being the reason for family drama. I logged into our emergency account later that day to check something for my records, and noticed a pending transfer from yesterday. $4,000, almost everything left in the account, flagged by the bank's fraud detection system as unusual activity. My hands started shaking as I stared at the screen. He'd tried to drain the entire account while I was sleeping in my new apartment. Just take all the remaining money we'd both put in there over the years. I called the bank immediately and got a representative who sounded tired but professional. I explained we were separated and I needed to remove my name from all shared accounts and block any further transfers. She asked a few verification questions, then started the paperwork process. Her voice got warmer when I mentioned the unauthorized transfers, like she'd dealt with this situation before and knew exactly what I was going through. She said the fraud flag would hold that transfer for 72 hours while they investigated, giving me time to get my name off the account completely. 3 days later, I got a thick envelope in my mailbox with a return address from a law firm downtown. Inside was a formal letter from Adrian's lawyer about dividing shared assets and financial accounts. The language was all legal and cold, talking about equitable distribution and joint property, like we were business partners dissolving a company instead of people who'd lived together for 10 years. He was trying to get ahead of me legally, establishing his version of events in official documents before I could respond. It was almost funny because I'd been documenting everything since the day I found that Denver lease. I had screenshots, bank statements, copies of emails, a whole folder of evidence sitting on my laptop. I took the letter to the free legal clinic that Kira had recommended during our last session. The lawyer there was a woman in her 50s who read through Adrian's letter while I sat across from her desk feeling nervous. She looked up after a few minutes and asked if I had documentation of the unauthorized transfers and my caregiving contributions. I showed her my folder and watched her eyebrows go up as she scrolled through everything. She said we could draft a response outlining his financial misconduct and the value of 4 years of unpaid caregiving labor. She seemed almost excited about it, like this was exactly the kind of case she enjoyed taking on. My phone rang 5 days later from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Adrian's dialysis nurse, the one who'd known me from years of sitting in that clinic 3 times a week. She asked if I'd heard about yesterday, and when I said no, she told me Adrian had collapsed during his treatment, and they'd called an ambulance. Her voice had this edge to it, like she was frustrated with me specifically for not being there. She said he'd been struggling lately and really needed his support system. I felt that old automatic guilt rising up, that instinct to drop everything and fix whatever was wrong. Then I took a breath and explained again that Adrian had systematically excluded me from his recovery plans while taking my money, that he'd literally signed a lease that had no room for me in it. Her tone shifted immediately to something uncomfortable, like she was realizing there was way more to the story than Adrian had told her. She apologized for calling and said she hoped I was taking care of myself. After we hung up, I sat on my couch staring at nothing, processing the information about his collapse. The guilt hit hard for about 4 hours. I kept thinking about him alone in that ambulance, scared and sick and wondering if I should at least check on him. Then I had my session with Kira that afternoon, and she helped me work through it properly. She pointed out that Adrian's current health crisis was the direct result of him missing treatments and mismanaging his condition, not because I'd left. He'd been so focused on his Denver escape plan that he'd let his immediate medical needs slide. I hadn't caused any of this by leaving. He'd caused it by prioritizing a future without me over maintaining his actual health in the present. The guilt was just a habit, a pattern I'd developed over 4 years of making his well-being my primary responsibility. It wasn't a reflection of actual responsibility now. Kira had me write down a list of all the ways Adrian had made his own choices that led to this moment, and seeing it in writing helped break through that automatic caregiver response. Hadley messaged me the next day about something completely different that somehow felt connected to everything else. She said her company had an opening for a position that would be a significant promotion for me, more money and more responsibility. It would mean more office presence and less flexibility for remote work, but I didn't need flexibility for dialysis schedules anymore. I didn't need to keep my calendar open for emergency hospital runs or last-minute appointment changes. For the first time in 4 years, I could actually prioritize career advancement without worrying about medical logistics. I spent an hour updating my resume that evening, listing all the projects I'd managed and the skills I'd developed. Applying for the position felt exciting in a way I'd forgotten work could be. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was actually building towards something that was mine. Diana sent me a message 2 days later with photo attachments. I opened them and found screenshots of text conversations between Felix and Adrian from 2 months ago. The messages were detailed and specific, with Adrian talking about needing space from my constant hovering and wanting to reclaim his independence in Denver. He wrote about feeling smothered by my caregiving, and how the treatment program was his chance to figure out who he was, without someone managing every aspect of his life. The texts showed clear premeditation, careful planning to exclude me while continuing to accept my caregiving labor, right up until the last possible moment. Felix's responses were mostly supportive brother stuff, saying he understood and would help however Adrian needed. Reading those messages made me feel vindicated and sick at the same time. Vindicated because here was proof that the exclusion was deliberate and planned, not some misunderstanding or last-minute decision. Sick because I'd been driving him to appointments and cooking his safe foods and organizing his medications while he was texting his brother about how much he wanted to get away from me. I forwarded the screenshots to the legal clinic lawyer the same day. She called me back within an hour, sounding more energized than during our first meeting. She said the messages significantly strengthened my case for recovering the money Adrian had transferred, because they showed documented intent to exclude me while accepting my financial contributions. That could potentially constitute fraud under certain interpretations. She explained the legal framework while I took notes, feeling weirdly calm about the whole thing. She asked if I wanted to authorize her to send a formal demand letter for the $5,000 he'd already taken, plus half of what I'd contributed to our emergency fund over the past 4 years. I did the math quickly in my head and realized that was a substantial amount of money. Money I'd earned working overtime. Money I'd saved by buying cheaper groceries for myself so we could afford his medical supplies. Money that represented 4 years of financial sacrifice. I told her yes, send the letter. Adrian's mother called again 3 days later, but this time her voice was completely different. Instead of crying and begging, she was angry, almost shouting into the phone about how I was abandoning her son when he was most vulnerable. She accused me of trying to steal money he needed for treatment, of being selfish and cruel and heartless. I let her finish her entire rant without interrupting, just held the phone away from my ear slightly and waited. When she finally ran out of steam, I spoke calmly and clearly. I explained that her son had stolen from me first by transferring $5,000 without my knowledge or permission. I explained that he'd planned his entire recovery without me while I was working overtime to fund it. I explained that I'd spent 4 years providing unpaid caregiving labor, while he was secretly planning to exclude me from his future. She was quiet for a long moment, then hung up without saying anything else. I sat there holding my phone and felt nothing except maybe relief that the conversation was over. Nicholas sent another message the following week with information that felt like the universe was creating its own consequences. He said Adrian's Denver trip was postponed indefinitely because the treatment center required a committed primary caregiver for the entire 2-month program. Adrian had apparently assumed he could hire professional care, or that Felix would fill that role full-time. But Felix was only cleared for 4 days off work for the actual donation surgery. The center's requirements were way more intensive than Adrian had researched when he was busy planning his independent new life. They needed someone who could be there for daily check-ins, medication management, appointment transportation, and emotional support throughout the recovery process. Exactly the kind of support I'd been providing for 4 years. Exactly the kind of support he'd systematically excluded from his Denver plans. His poor planning and his determination to cut me out had eliminated his access to the specialized treatment program he'd wanted so badly. I read Nicholas's message 3 times, processing the information and trying to figure out how I felt about it. Mostly I felt tired and sad and maybe a little bit satisfied that reality was catching up with Adrian's fantasy of independence. The promotion email came through on a Tuesday morning while I was finishing reports at my desk. My manager wanted to see me in her office at 2, and when I walked in she had this huge smile, and told me they were moving me to senior analyst with a 20% raise and my own office with actual walls and a door. I sat there processing the information and feeling this weird disconnect, because for 4 years every achievement at work felt secondary to managing Adrian's medical crisis, but now this was just mine. Hadley grabbed me after the meeting and insisted we go out for drinks that evening to celebrate, and at the bar she raised her glass and said, "Here's to my future being about my own goals instead of someone else's medical needs." I felt proud of myself for the first time in years, not just competent at caregiving, but actually valued for my professional skills and my ability to analyze data and lead projects. The raise meant I could pay off my credit card debt faster and maybe even save for a real vacation, something I hadn't done since before Adrian got sick. The legal clinic lawyer called 3 days later while I was setting up my new office and arranging furniture. She said Adrian's lawyer responded to our demand letter with an offer to return $3,000 of the $5,000 he transferred without permission. Her voice was matter-of-fact as she explained that pursuing the full amount would require expensive court proceedings that could drag on for months, and this settlement recovered most of my immediate losses while avoiding legal fees that might eat up the difference anyway. I asked if this was fair, and she said fair was subjective, but practical was concrete, and $3,000 in my account next week was more useful than maybe $5,000 after a year of litigation. I agreed to accept the settlement because I wanted this resolved and finished, not dragged out in court battles that would keep me connected to Adrian's chaos. She said she'd send over the paperwork and have the funds transferred within 10 business days. Tyson knocked on my apartment door that weekend, holding a plate of cookies his sister made, and asking if I wanted to come to game night at his place that evening. He said a bunch of people from the building got together every other Saturday to play board games and eat too much food, and newcomers were always welcome. I almost said no out of habit before remembering I had no reason to stay home anymore, no evening medications to manage or symptoms to monitor. The game night turned out to be 6 people from various apartments playing this complicated strategy game I'd never heard of while eating pizza and arguing cheerfully about rules. They were friendly and normal and interested in regular things like sports and cooking and local politics, and I realized how socially isolated I became during the caregiving years. My entire social circle had shrunk to medical professionals who knew Adrian's condition and his family members who called about his appointments. These people asked me about my new promotion and my favorite restaurants, and whether I'd seen the new park they built downtown, and nobody mentioned hospitals or treatment plans or medication schedules even once. Diana's message came through on Monday morning while I was reviewing quarterly reports. She said she and Felix broke up over the weekend because she couldn't get past his willingness to go along with Adrian's lies without questioning them. Her text was long and sad but also certain, explaining that she needed a partner who thought critically about right and wrong instead of defaulting to family loyalty, regardless of who got hurt. She said the situation with me revealed problems that were already there, like how Felix always took Adrian's side in family disputes without hearing other perspectives, and how he valued keeping peace over addressing actual issues. I felt guilty that my situation contributed to their breakup, but she insisted it revealed existing problems she'd been ignoring. She thanked me for inadvertently helping her see what she needed to see, even though the timing was awful and the circumstances were messy. The settlement check arrived exactly 10 business days later, in a plain envelope with the law firm's return address. I took it to the bank during lunch and deposited the full $3,000, then immediately transferred $2,500 to my credit card account. The debt was from medical supplies insurance didn't cover, special foods for his restricted diet that cost twice as much as regular groceries, and gas money for 3 times weekly dialysis trips across town. I'd been carrying this balance for almost 2 years, making minimum payments while Adrian used our emergency fund for his own purposes. Watching the credit card balance decrease felt like erasing physical evidence of my exploitation, deleting proof of how much I'd sacrificed financially while he was planning a future without me. I kept $500 in checking for regular expenses, and felt lighter somehow, like I was slowly buying back pieces of my life. Kira's office had this big window that looked out over a parking lot, and I spent the first 10 minutes of my Thursday appointment just staring at cars coming and going. She asked what I was thinking about, and I said, I didn't know how to separate the grief. Like I was sad about losing the relationship, but also angry about the 4 years I spent caregiving. She helped me understand I was grieving 2 different things: the relationship I thought I had where we were partners facing illness together, and the 4 years of my life I spent caregiving for someone who apparently saw me as a service provider, rather than an actual partner. The grief was complicated because the love was real even though the reciprocation wasn't, and I was allowed to miss him while also recognizing that leaving was necessary. She said it was normal to feel multiple contradictory emotions about the same situation, and I didn't have to resolve them into one clean feeling. I could be sad and angry and relieved and guilty all at the same time, and none of those feelings canceled out the others. Nicholas sent a message the following week with news that felt like the universe creating its own consequences. He said Adrian ended up not going to Denver at all because he couldn't meet the treatment center's requirements for support structure and committed caregiving. The specialized program was his best chance at the new treatment approach, but his choices systematically eliminated his access to it. Felix was still willing to donate through a standard local procedure at our regular hospital, but it wouldn't have the same innovative techniques or extensive monitoring that made the Denver program special. Nicholas said Adrian was angry and depressed about the change in plans, but mostly he seemed shocked that his actions had actual consequences he couldn't talk or manipulate his way out of. The treatment center had strict requirements for good reasons, and Adrian's determination to exclude me from his healthy life meant he no longer qualified for the program he'd wanted so desperately. The next message from Nicholas came 3 days later with more specific information about Adrian's revised plans. He was doing a standard kidney transplant at our local hospital next month with Felix as donor, same hospital where I'd spent hundreds of hours in waiting rooms during dialysis appointments. The procedure would help him significantly and extend his life and reduce his symptoms, but it wasn't the miracle cure the Denver program offered with its specialized protocols and extended monitoring. He'd still need ongoing medical management and lifestyle restrictions and regular checkups for the rest of his life. I felt genuine relief that he was getting help, and that Felix was still willing to donate despite everything. But I also felt this complicated satisfaction that his attempt to exclude me from his healthy life didn't work out as planned. He'd wanted to shed his sick person identity and start fresh in Denver without the caregiver who knew too much, but instead he was stuck with standard treatment in the same city where everyone knew what he'd done. 3 months after I left, I stopped at a coffee shop near the hospital to grab something before a dentist appointment. Adrian's dialysis nurse was in line ahead of me, and she turned around and recognized me immediately. Her face did this complicated thing where she looked surprised and uncomfortable and sorry all at once. She paid for her coffee and waited while I ordered mine, then asked if we could talk outside for a minute. She apologized for the phone calls pressuring me to come back, said she didn't understand the full situation at the time, and thought I was just scared of the Denver move or something. She mentioned Adrian comes to treatments alone now and seems depressed but compliant with his medical routines, and his numbers are stable enough for the transplant surgery. I thanked her for the apology and meant it, because hearing her acknowledge she'd been wrong helped close that particular guilt thread. She asked if I was doing okay, and I said yes, actually, I was doing really well. We stood there for another minute making awkward small talk about the weather before going our separate ways. The guy from game night, his name was Jeremy, asked me to dinner after the next game night session. He was straightforward about it, said he thought I was interesting and wanted to get to know me better outside the group setting, and would I want to grab food sometime. I said yes before my brain could manufacture reasons to decline, and we went to this Italian place downtown the following Friday. The date was fine, not magical or life-changing, but it reminded me I was allowed to prioritize my own happiness and explore connections that might actually be reciprocal. We talked about our jobs and our families and places we wanted to travel, normal first date conversation that had nothing to do with medication schedules and symptoms. He asked about my interests and hobbies, and I realized I didn't have clear answers anymore because I'd spent 4 years organizing my life around someone else's medical needs. I told him I was figuring that out again, reclaiming parts of myself I'd lost, and he said that sounded like a healthy thing to be doing. We agreed to see each other again, keeping it casual and light. No pressure or expectations beyond enjoying each other's company. I started spending more time with Hadley outside of work, and she became the kind of friend who actually knew everything instead of just the polite surface version. She invited me to her family's Thanksgiving dinner in November, which felt huge because I hadn't done a real holiday meal in years, where I wasn't calculating sodium content or worrying about protein restrictions. Her parents lived in this warm, cluttered house full of people talking over each other and a golden retriever named Butter, who kept trying to steal rolls off the counter. Her mom hugged me when I arrived like she already knew me, and her dad asked about my work promotion with genuine interest. We ate turkey and stuffing and 3 different kinds of pie, and I didn't have to check a single ingredient label or portion size. Hadley's younger brother told terrible jokes and her sister argued with her mom about politics, and it all felt beautifully normal. After dinner, her mom pulled me aside while we were doing dishes and mentioned she'd noticed how much happier I seemed compared to the video calls she'd caught glimpses of 6 months ago when Hadley and I worked on joint projects. I realized she was right, that something fundamental had shifted in how I moved through the world. A few days later, I got a message from Felix that I stared at for a solid minute before opening. He apologized directly for his role in everything, said he'd been so focused on being the hero donor that he never questioned why Adrian was making decisions about their living situation without including me. He admitted he should have talked to me directly instead of just accepting Adrian's version of events, and that he was sorry for being part of excluding me from plans I'd helped fund and organize. The apology felt genuine in a way that helped me let go of the specific anger I'd been carrying toward him. I wrote back saying I appreciated his honesty and that I understood how Adrian could manipulate situations to make his choices seem reasonable. Felix responded that he and Diana had broken up over it, that she couldn't get past him not thinking critically about right and wrong when family loyalty was involved. I felt bad about that, but also recognized it wasn't really my responsibility to carry. My next therapy session with Kira focused on how I could approach future relationships without falling into the same patterns. She pointed out that I had a tendency to derive my worth from being needed, from being the person who could handle everything and never complained. We talked about how that made me attractive to people who wanted someone to manage their problems, but it wasn't actually a foundation for equal partnership. I practiced stating my own needs out loud in session, which felt awkward and selfish even though Kira kept emphasizing it wasn't. She gave me homework to notice when I was about to volunteer to fix something for someone else, and paused to ask myself if I actually wanted to do it, or if I was just performing my caregiver role. The work felt uncomfortable and necessary, like stretching a muscle that had atrophied from years of not using it. That weekend, Hazel and I took a trip to visit another friend in a city 2 hours away. My first real vacation in 4 years. We ate at restaurants without me checking every ingredient for kidney safety, stayed up past midnight drinking wine and playing card games without worrying about morning medication schedules, and slept in until 10 without any alarms. The freedom felt disorienting at first, like I kept waiting for some crisis to interrupt us, but gradually I relaxed into it. We wandered through bookstores and tried on ridiculous clothes at thrift shops and ate ice cream for lunch because we could. Hazel kept catching me smiling at random moments and asking what I was thinking about, and I told her I was thinking about nothing, which was the whole point. Nicholas messaged me the following week with an update I'd been half expecting. Adrian's transplant surgery had gone well, and he was recovering at his parents' house with hired nursing help coming in daily. Felix's recovery was also progressing normally, and he'd already gone back to work part-time. I felt genuinely glad the medical part had worked out, that Adrian would get years added to his life and better quality than dialysis provided. But I also recognized I had absolutely no desire to be part of his life anymore, to know details about his recovery or hear updates about his health. Both things felt true at the same time, and I was learning to be okay with holding contradictory feelings without needing to resolve them into one clean emotion. 4 months after I'd left, I went to my landlord's office and signed a year lease on my studio apartment instead of the month-to-month I'd been doing. I bought real furniture from an actual furniture store instead of borrowed pieces and sidewalk finds. I painted one wall a deep blue color that Adrian would have hated, said it was too dark and made the space feel smaller. I hung art. I chose myself without considering anyone else's taste. Prints of national parks and abstract paintings that made me feel calm. The apartment was small, but it reflected my choices, my preferences, my life. I stood in the middle of it one evening after finishing the wall and felt this deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. Adrian sent me a message through Nicholas asking if we could talk. Nicholas made it very clear he was only passing along the message and wouldn't pressure me either way, that he supported whatever I decided. I thought about it for 2 days, turning it over in my mind during work, and while cooking dinner and lying in bed at night. Part of me wanted to hear what Adrian would say, whether he'd actually apologize or just try to explain his choices in a way that made them sound reasonable. But the bigger part of me recognized I didn't need closure from him, or explanations that would probably just be more manipulation. I had closure from my own choices and the life I was actively building. I told Nicholas to tell Adrian no, that I wasn't interested in talking, and felt relief instead of guilt when I sent the message. The guy from game night, whose name was Jeremy, and I went on several more dates through November and December. It developed into something steady and comfortable, not intense or overwhelming, but genuinely pleasant. He knew my history because I'd been honest about it early on, and he respected that I needed to move slowly and figure out what I actually wanted. When I mentioned being nervous about getting too invested too quickly, he said we could just see where it goes without putting pressure on either of us to define it or make promises. The lack of intensity felt healthy instead of boring, like maybe relationships didn't have to be all-consuming to be worthwhile. Work sent me to a conference in another city in early December, and I volunteered to present on a panel about managing remote teams effectively. Standing in front of a room full of colleagues talking about my professional knowledge reminded me I had valuable skills and experience beyond medical caregiving. I answered questions about communication strategies and productivity tracking and building trust with distributed teams, and people actually took notes on what I said. Several attendees asked for my contact information afterward to continue the conversation, and I exchanged business cards feeling proud of my expertise in a way that had nothing to do with being needed by someone else. One evening, I sat down with my budget spreadsheet and calculated that I'd paid off 60% of the debt I'd accumulated during the caregiving years. My promotion salary made a huge difference, and not having to budget for Adrian's medical supplies and special foods meant my money actually went toward my own life. I was on track to be completely debt-free within another year, maybe sooner if I kept picking up the occasional overtime project. Financial independence felt just as important as emotional independence, like I was building a foundation that couldn't be taken away by someone else's choices or needs. Hazel stopped by my apartment one evening with takeout, and we sat on my blue couch eating pad thai while she told me about her latest work drama. After she finished, she got quiet for a second, and then said she was proud of how I'd rebuilt everything, and that I seemed like myself again, the version she remembered from before Adrian got sick. I asked what she meant, and she said I actually laughed at jokes now instead of giving fake smiles while checking my phone for medical emergencies. She said I made plans without adding 10 disclaimers about maybe having to cancel. She said I talked about my own goals and interests instead of just managing someone else's crisis every second of every day. I sat there holding my container of noodles and realized she was completely right. I did laugh more easily now, genuine laughs that came from actually finding things funny instead of trying to seem normal. I made dinner plans with coworkers without that constant background anxiety about dialysis schedules or medication times. I talked about the promotion I wanted and the conference I might attend, and the trip Hazel and I were planning, all things that belonged to me and my future. The parts of myself I thought disappeared forever during those 4 years were coming back piece by piece. 5 months after I left, my company threw their annual holiday party at this restaurant downtown with a private room and a small dance floor. In previous years, I either skipped entirely or left after exactly 1 hour, always rushing home for evening medications, or because Adrian felt sick and needed me. This time I showed up and actually stayed, talking to colleagues I barely knew before about normal things like favorite shows and weekend plans and upcoming vacations. I made lunch plans with 3 different people without once thinking about medical schedules. When the music started, I stayed on the dance floor with everyone else, moving badly to songs I actually recognized because I'd had time to listen to music again. Hadley pulled out her phone and took a photo of me mid-laugh, my head thrown back and arms up, completely relaxed and happy. Later that night, when she sent me the picture, I stared at it for a long time because I barely recognized the person looking back at me. That woman in the photo looked light and free and genuinely joyful, not performing happiness while carrying constant worry underneath. A few days after the party, Diana sent me a message saying she was doing well after her breakup with Felix, and thanking me for inadvertently helping her see problems she'd been ignoring in their relationship. She said watching how Felix went along with Adrian's lies without questioning them made her realize he did similar things with her, choosing easy agreement over actually thinking about right and wrong. She said she felt grateful even though the whole situation sucked, because now she could find someone who treated her like an equal partner, instead of just going along with whatever was convenient. We made plans to grab coffee the following weekend, and I realized I might actually gain a real friendship from all the wreckage that happened. Sometimes good things grow in unexpected places, in the spaces left behind when bad situations finally end. On a quiet Sunday morning, I woke up in my blue-walled apartment without any alarms going off, no medication schedule to follow, No crisis calls interrupting the peace. I made coffee and sat on my couch reading a book just because I wanted to, not because someone was too sick to talk or needed me to research medical information. The silence felt perfect instead of lonely. Jeremy from game night was coming over later for dinner, our first time cooking together at my place, and Hazel and I were planning next month's trip to visit her sister in another state. My calendar had things on it that I actually wanted to do, plans I made because they interested me instead of obligations I took on because someone needed me. My life wasn't perfect or dramatic or anything like the romance novels make relationships seem, but it was genuinely mine now, built around my own choices and needs and goals. I spent 4 years making myself invisible, shrinking down to fit around someone else's illness, and now I was learning to take up space again, learning to say what I wanted, to make plans that mattered to me, to invest in my own future instead of just managing someone else's present. It felt exactly right.